Spoilers for all the games listed on screen. And while that's going on, I'm going to ask you guys to like and subscribe if you end up enjoying the video. I have a goal for 200 subscribers by the end of the year, and the way things are going, that seems like a pretty reasonable goal. But with all that out of the way, let's start the video. Killing is a staple of many video games. While it's undeniably prevalent, the way games handle their protagonist killing is a complex issue. As an artistic medium, video games represent and mirror real-life experiences, or at least attempt to, in a way that doesn't compromise gameplay. Games have the potential to explore the psychological and moral implications of violence, but they often don't because they don't have to. It would be a lie to say that killing in games is not fun, and sometimes that's all a game is trying to do, be fun to play. Games like Borderlands, Ratchet & Clank, and GTA focus on gameplay first and foremost, so the impact of their protagonists going on killing sprees is an afterthought for devs and players. But in contrast to this often sensationalized depiction of killing in games, real-life murder carries severe consequences, even in cases of self-defense. So I'm going to examine how this topic is and sometimes isn't handled. And you'll notice it ties into a bigger conversation about the connection between story and gameplay. And the first game I'm going to talk about is Uncharted. Naughty Dog's poster boy, Nathan Drake, doesn't set out with the intention to kill, but he's fully aware of the dangers he faces. Once he's in these situations, sometimes the only way out is to be the only one left alive, so it's understandable that he ends up with some blood on his hands. Most people, even if they willingly put themselves at a risky spot, would still fight to survive. The real issue is that the game never addresses the aftermath or the emotional consequences of these encounters. Nathan Drake is a compelling character whose portrayal in Uncharted often diverges between cinematic cutscenes and the interactive gameplay. This disconnect highlights a broader issue in many action games, the chasm between narrative and mechanics. In cutscenes, Drake is this quirky, charismatic guy.
One temple will reveal a
pathway to Shambhala. Jesus, Flynn, while we're young.
He's not a saint because he's basically a professional thief, but despite this, his kind-hearted nature is always on display. Like how in Uncharted 2, he goes out of his way to save Chloe even after finding out she double-crossed him. In contrast, gameplay transforms Drake into a proficient killing machine. The focus shifts from character development to efficient combat. The nuanced character portrayed in cutscenes often becomes a secondary element to the mechanics of gameplay. Do you think a guy like Nathan Drake would feel nothing about killing all these people, even if it was in self-defense? And even if you could argue that he could justify this to himself, would the people around him have no issues with his actions? Someone like Scully might, because he engages in the same behaviors that Nate does. But with someone like Elena, who is constantly being shown to have compassion for others, how does she watch Drake kill so many people and have no complications? The only character who truly calls Nate out for his killings is Lazarevich at the end of Uncharted 2.
But you're no different from me, Drake. How many men have you killed? How many just today?
This moment is interesting because as players, we also have no idea how many people Nate kills. It's unclear to what extent the game canonizes Nate's gameplay kills. If it acknowledges all of them, which it probably doesn't, Lazarevich's comment carries significant weight. But if none of those kills are considered canon, then it feels like a hollow attempt at guilt tripping, especially coming from somebody who ordered the massacre of an entire village of peaceful monks and killed Jeff the Camera Guy. Rest in peace, Jeff the Camera Guy. This sort of disconnect is very unique to games. Films and TV shows are passive forms of media. Viewers consume the story as it's presented with no influence over the plot or characters' actions. While games have a high level of interactivity, players actively participate in games. They can make choices that affect the outcome and experience. Players have agency, and it's because of this agency that contradictions in story and gameplay can be jarring, almost as if the act of you playing the game goes against the world you are experiencing. While I was researching for this video, I learned of the term ludonarrative dissonance. Never heard of this before in my life. The term was introduced by Clint Hawking in a blog post from 2007. The blog post was titled Ludonarrative Dissonance in BioShock. In it, Hawking analyzed BioShock's narrative elements and how they clash with its gameplay mechanics. In BioShock, the player is faced with a moral choice involving the Little Sisters, young girls who have been genetically modified to harvest a substance called Adam from the dead. The game's narrative emphasizes themes of objectivism, morality, and free will, but the gameplay mechanics push the player towards either harvesting the Little Sisters for more power or saving them, creating a tension between the story and the player's actions. Also, he argues, I don't agree with this conclusion, but let me not go on a tangent. Hawking argued that this tension creates a dissonance between the story the game is trying to tell and the gameplay gameplay choices available to the player. He coined the term ludonarrative dissonance to describe this phenomenon, combining ludo, a prefix meaning play from Latin, and narrative to encapsulate the conflict between gameplay and story. Hawking's critique sparked a lot of discussion within the gaming community and among critics. Some agreed with his analysis, arguing that ludonarrative dissonance is a critical flaw in some games, while others felt the term was overemphasized or misunderstood. Regardless, Hawking's post and the concept of ludonarrative dissonance have had a lasting impact on game design and criticism. While the term ludonarrative dissonance has gained popularity, its original meaning refers to a specific clash between a game's narrative and gameplay themes. Uncharted might exhibit a disconnect between cutscenes and gameplay portrayals of Drake, but it doesn't necessarily align with Hawking's original definition, as the game lacks overt anti-violence themes or character struggles related to killing. While I do believe that over time the term has broadened enough that Uncharted could be described by it, to truly demonstrate ludonarrative dissonance authentically, a game would need to present a clear contradiction between its story and gameplay, such as Tomb Raider 2013, which contrasts Lara's trauma with the core gameplay mechanic. Very early on in Tomb Raider, Lara is forced into a brutal act of self-defense. After washing up on an island, she finds herself captured by the locals. One of them attempts to grape her without the G. This eventually culminates in a confrontation between the two, where only one person can be left alive, and Lara is the one left breathing. This event, understandably, leaves Lara very distraught.
Oh God!
The game effectively portrays her initial shock and trauma. However, this emotional depth is quickly undermined as the gameplay transitions into repetitive combat scenarios. Lara's subsequent kills are treated with increasing detachment, creating a jarring contrast between the game's narrative and mechanics. By humanizing Lara in these early sequences, the developers inadvertently highlight the dissonance between the character's emotional journey and the player's actions. This is what I believe to be a prime example of ludonarrative dissonance. But a deeper discussion into ludonarrative dissonance is outside the scope of this video. Since this video is about how games handle their protagonists being serial killers, we can easily infer that if a game employs ludonarrative dissonance, then they just don't tackle the topic or handle it in a very maladroit way. Various reasons exist for why games take this disconnected approach, but the main reason is likely that it limits the gameplay. Shooting elements are tied and true to gaming because they're fun. However, it's hard to include this type of gameplay and have it connect to the story unless the game is a military shooter or set up in a way that you're fighting creatures and monsters. Despite this, these issues don't overshadow the overall positive experience offered by these games. It's clear that the developers aim to balance these two elements, despite the resulting inconsistencies. Uncharted even has a trophy called ludonarrative dissonance, so the developers are well aware of the term and how it applies to their games. But there are games that try to more seamlessly integrate gameplay with the story, and one of these games was even made by the same studio who made Uncharted. I hope you guys have made peace with the golf club, because we're about to talk about The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. The world of The Last of Us is a very cruel place. This is a world of survivors. Taking life isn't a choice, it's a necessity. The events of The Last of Us Part 1 solidify this concept into players. Joel is shown to have survived due in part to his indifference towards others and killing if needed. Even Ellie, a child who lost her mother and best friend, continuously faces the worst of humanity and learns that same cruelty. The justification for killing is woven into the rules of this world. Ellie's fight against David is a prime example of this. It's one of her many introductions to fighting to survive, but even though this is her origin, most of her kills don't come from self-defense. The Last of Us Part 2 is a very divisive game. While I think the hospital scene and the ending of Part 1 doomed any further portrayals of the Fireflies, that's where majority of my grievances start and end. Ellie's journey is pivotal for understanding the act of killing, but not necessarily for justifying it. After Joel's death, there's this connection between Ellie and the player. We want to get revenge for Joel's death, but willing to flatline everything and everyone who gets in the way. But even when fueled by blind rage, we all have our limits. And Ellie's limit starts to manifest itself after she tortures Nora. The Last of Us Part 2 attempts to deeply explore the psychological consequences of violence. This game doesn't shy away from showing the toll the killing takes on Ellie and Abby. The shot of Ellie's hand trembling is a simple but effective way of showing this. She's not Joel, not even close. Her emotional and physical scars are far more evident. Ellie's quest for revenge leads her down a dark path, forcing players to confront the brutality of her actions. The gameplay supports this narrative by creating intense, morally challenging scenarios that align with the story's themes. But even taking this into account, the game doesn't fully canonize any of Ellie's gameplay murders. The most important deaths are still the ones that happen in cutscenes, and are the ones that mostly contribute to Ellie's declining mental state. You're never going to see a reaction like this during gameplay. You as the player can hold somebody at gunpoint. You'll hear people pleading with you to let their friend go, all while the person you have captive begs for their life. Since the story draws so much attention to violence, I wonder if people's opinion on Ellie varies depending on how they played the game. If you killed everything in sight with no hesitation, when the weight of Ellie's actions start to sink in, did you see Ellie, and by extension yourself, as a monster who took it too far? Most of these enemies were trying to kill her, but this mirrors Uncharted, where her actions led her into enemy crosshairs. And this feeds right back into what we were talking about with Tomb Raider, where devs intend to balance both gameplay and story, but this sometimes can cause inconsistencies between the two. But in this case, it's just suspension of disbelief. The actions Ellie takes are plausible, just the severity and extent of them are exaggerated in favor of an entertaining gameplay loop. The gameplay of The Last of Us is almost flawless. For all the criticism this game gets, most if not none of it is directed at the gameplay. A lot of people do find enjoyment in sneaking around, and since Ubisoft refuses to release another Splinter Cell game, you might try to scratch that itch using The Last of Us. But most people are just gonna run and gun everything. Ludonarrative harmony, I guess we can call it, can sometimes be a disservice to the gameplay experience. If The Last of Us developers decided to disincentivize players from killing or limited you to non-lethal weapons, this would hamper the gameplay. Instead, the game asks the player to suspend their disbelief. In this case, the story may portray a character who is reluctant, remorseful, or has complications about killing, but the gameplay requires them to engage in frequent or often brutal combat. This disconnect is often given by players who prioritize the mechanics, understanding that the actions required for compelling gameplay don't always perfectly match with the character's moral compass. Suspension of disbelief is essential in gaming because it allows players to overlook these narrative and gameplay disparities. In action-heavy games like Uncharted, Tomb Raider, and The Last of Us, we accept that the protagonists, despite their reluctance or supposed innocence, are capable of taking down waves of enemies because it makes for a more thrilling gameplay experience. If these characters' gameplay actions were more grounded to the narrative, the game would become boring. By suspending disbelief, players can enjoy intense, fast-paced action without being too bogged down by how the story and mechanics don't always align perfectly. And this is most likely what all three of the aforementioned games are trying to employ. But we as players can only suspend our disbelief so far. And when that line is crossed, we enter the territory of ludonarrative dissonance. Uncharted 2 has a mission where you have to sneak into a museum to steal something, but it's obviously heavily guarded. The devs knew that players could not suspend their disbelief enough to believe that Drake would be okay with killing innocent guards that are just doing their jobs. So this mission gives you another solution.
Now what?
It's time to tip the odds back in our favor.
Oh, that's brilliant. Guns? What are you thinking?
Relax, Gandhi. They're tranquilizer guns, totally non-lethal. Your conscience will remain unscathed.
This gun only holds one round and has very limited range. This happens in the early stages of the game and is mostly used as a tutorial to the gunplay. So because it's the tutorial, the devs gave players a simple weapon and a tame, slow environment. This works for this stage of the game, but this section is not a highlight of Uncharted 2. There's a reason you never see the return of the tranq gun. Such a slow, short-range weapon is not suited for later gameplay scenarios. And if the game was balanced around a weapon like this, there would probably be max 10 enemies in a level. You could argue that the game could have designed more non-lethal weapons. In this department, the devs are only limited by their creativity, but all weapons in the game are modeled after real-life weapons. So if we look at the accessible non-lethal weapon options, we have a tranq gun, which is already in the game, a stun gun, which has a worse range and a longer reload time, and pepper spray. Would you want to trade your AK for pepper spray? Honestly, it might be fun for a single level. In the world of The Last of Us, I doubt people even bother trying to create non-lethal weapons. This highlights the challenge in designing non-lethal combat in video games. Game devs take a lot of inspiration from each other. They incorporate and elaborate on game elements that have been successful in other games. This is the whole reason we have the concept of a clone. Like how I've been told in the 2000s, most first-person shooters were called Doom clones. This sharing of gameplay elements has made it so that shooting mechanics are extremely refined and accessible for players and devs. These shooting genres have developed around lethal combat because they their roots trace back to games like House of the Dead and obviously Battlefield and Call of Duty. Players have generally grown accustomed to and prefer mowing down enemies with high lethality weapons. However, some games embrace the challenge with more creative solutions, such as Watch Dogs 2. It takes a more liberal approach to its weapon design compared to traditional action games. The game centers around Marcus Holloway, a young and talented hacker who joins DedSec, a hacktivist collective fighting against the oppressive Bloom Corporation. Bloom is a tech giant that controls the city's infrastructure and operates a pervasive surveillance system known as CTOS. Throughout the game, Marcus and DedSec work to dismantle this control, but along the way they also face a variety of other threats, including criminal gangs and cartels. Despite the somewhat serious overarching plot, Watch Dogs 2 maintains a lighter tone, especially in comparison to other games in the open-world action genre. Many of its missions reflect this, with objectives that range from getting revenge on a gang that killed one of the DedSec members, rest in peace Horatio, to more playful and low-stakes missions such as sabotaging the production of a movie by stealing its main character, a talking car. Why? Because they found the movie insulting to DedSec, but mostly because they did it to get more followers. This mission alone tells you the personalities of this group. They're more relaxed, humorous, and idealistic, which gives the game a sense of liberty. This lighter atmosphere is also reflected in some of the game's weapon choices. Instead of having to rely on lethal weapons, the primary weapon Marcus uses is a stun gun. In addition to this, players also have access to more unconventional non-lethal options like a paintball rifle. And if you have the DLC, you gain access to a shotgun that fires blasts of air. These weapons emphasize Marcus and the gang's ethos of disrupting systems and exploiting corrupt organizations without causing unnecessary harm. Unfortunately, Watch Dogs 2 also includes a range of lethal weapons, such as assault rifles, submachine guns, and RPGs, which don't align with the game's narrative or character motivations. These lethal options feel out of place, as the game offers so many creative ways to interact with or distract enemies. The inclusion of high lethality weapons undermines the message of Resistance true hacking. This game takes a lot of inspiration from GTA. I guess we could call it a GTA-like. Those lethal weapons are just staples of the genre, but what works for one game will not always work for another. Honestly, this game might have been a better example of ludonarrative dissonance than Tomb Raider, because the contrast between scenes like this,
I think next time we're gonna need a higher firewall, pal. Cyber Driver.
and then gameplay like this, is jarring. What makes this dissonance more glaring is that Watch Dogs 2 allows players to gun down innocent guards in many low-stakes missions without any narrative repercussions. The game progresses as if Marcus and DedSec have caused no real harm, treating lethal force with surprising indifference in a game that focuses so much on the public's perception of this group. This makes the disconnect even more apparent compared to games like Uncharted or Tomb Raider, where the protagonists are at least acknowledged to be capable of violence, even if the sheer volume of killing is somewhat ignored in the narrative. This is particularly disappointing because, as we've already talked about, the game already provides enough tools to complete missions non-lethally. Marcus has access to a quadcopter and an RC jumper, allowing him to interact with mission objectives remotely, often without ever setting foot inside a building. For players who prefer a more hands-on approach, Watch Dogs 2 offers a competent stealth system. Combine this with the ability to hack enemy communications, which is basically the point-and-click version of throwing a brick, and an electric shock device that can incapacitate enemies in an area. The game offers plenty non-lethal options. Even in a pinch, you can always rely on your stun gun and the other non-lethal weapon options. Though, these non-lethal strategies require more precision and patience than simply spraying enemies with bullets. But they make the gameplay far more interesting and differentiate Watch Dogs from its contemporaries like GTA. The game could have thrived on these mechanics alone. While some games like The Last of Us necessitate a more violent approach due to the bleak setting and themes, Watch Dogs 2 has systems in place to make non-lethality a core feature. Still, Watch Dogs 2 stands out for its thoughtful integration of non-lethal weaponry, offering players ways to engage with enemies that fit both the game's playful tone and its narrative focus. The next game we're going to talk about manages to implement both lethal and non-lethal gameplay in a way that ties into decisions you're making in the story, to the point where it can actually incentivize killing. Infamous second son follows Delson Rowe, a young guy who discovers he's a conduit, one of few individuals with superhuman abilities. What sets Delson apart is that his power is he can copy the abilities of other conduits that he touches. The game is set in a fictional version of Seattle, where conduits are feared and hunted by the Department of Unified Protection, or DUP, an oppressive organization tasked with imprisoning conduits because they're viewed as bioterrorists. As Delson navigates the city, he must use his growing array of powers to fight against the DUP and liberate Seattle. However, the heart of the game's experience lies in its choices. Key moments present the players with major karmic choices, decisions that significantly impact the narrative and the fate of Seattle. These moments shape the course of the story and reinforce the consequences of Delson's actions. This system allows players to shape Delson's journey through moral decisions, determining whether he'll become a hero or a villain, which ties into the game's karma system. The karma system doesn't just affect the narrative. It also drives the gameplay mechanics, offering distinct abilities and upgrades depending on the player's moral choices. The karma system is central to both the gameplay and narrative. They influence Delson's character development, power, appearance, and how NPCs react to him. For example, choosing to help citizens and subdue enemies non-lethally grants positive karma. On the other hand, attacking civilians and killing enemies grants bad karma. This makes it so that killing is inherently tied to the gameplay loop in a way that makes sense thematically for a bad karma playthrough, while still giving you the option to avoid killing if it doesn't align with the actions you're taking in the story and the character you think Delson is. But let's talk a bit more about this karma system. The karma system has a tangible effect on gameplay, unlocking different abilities depending on your moral alignment. Delson's powers evolve with his karma rank, which increases as players accumulate bad and good karma points. The game features 5 karma ranks on both the good and evil paths. On the good route, Delson progresses from Protector to Hero, while on the evil route, he progresses from Thug to Infamous. Abilities are unlocked through a skill tree system, with each node requiring a resource known as shards, which can be collected throughout the game world. However, certain abilities are gated behind karma ranks, meaning that players must fully commit to either being good or evil to unlock their character's full potential. This creates a dynamic where gameplay reinforces the moral decisions you're taking in the story, making each action feel a bit more meaningful. Through the game, Delson can acquire 4 distinct powers: Smoke, Neon, Video, and Concrete. Each power offers a unique playstyle, providing flexibility in combat and in exploration. But no matter how different they play, all abilities within a power are either lethal or non-lethal, or set you up to do a lethal or non-lethal takedown. For example, while using Neon, you can unlock an ability called Laser Insight, which will highlight enemies' weak points. You can fire at the enemy's leg to subdue them and at their head to kill them. While the game allows you to experiment with your chosen path, the evil allied abilities are often more powerful, destructive, and easy to use, encouraging players to lean into that darker side of a karma system if they just want to have more fun with the game, which further highlights the difficulty in designing non-lethal combat. For the most part, you are handicapping yourself in this game if you choose the good path. You could argue that it's designed this way because being a hero is harder than being a villain, blah blah blah, but unfortunately it's just boring. Most of the evil karma skill tree upgrades will drastically change in ability, while the good karma upgrades act more like passives. If you look back at Neon, there's an evil karma upgrade that will increase the fire rates of your primary fire, while there's no similar upgrade for the good karma path. What you do get instead is an upgrade to the Laser Insight that allows you to slow down time for a little bit longer, which is useful but doesn't feel as gratifying. This criticism is prevalent in games with karma or morality systems, but one of the most infamous being the last game I'm going to talk about, Dishonored. Dishonored is a stealth action game set in the industrial city of Dunwall, a plague-ridden dystopia. You play as Corvo, the bodyguard of the Empress who is framed for her murder. Seeking revenge and redemption, Corvo gains supernatural abilities and sets out to eliminate everybody involved in his framing. You can choose between lethal and non-lethal approaches to achieve his goals, with the story's outcomes shaped by the player's decision. Dishonored's karma system is called the Chaos System. The Chaos System tracks the player's actions and affects the game world, story, and ending. It primarily revolves around how violent or non-violent the player chooses to be. The more lethal actions you take, like killing guards and civilians, the higher the chaos level rises. This can result in a darker, more hostile world with increased enemies, more rats, and a more pessimistic tone to character interactions. On the other hand, low chaos can be maintained by using non-lethal methods, sneaking past enemies or neutralizing targets without killing them. The level of chaos influences the story's outcomes and different endings, with high chaos leading to a bleaker conclusion, while low chaos results in a more helpful resolution. Conclusion, resolution, I thought that was kind of clever. The system encourages players to carefully consider the consequences of their action. However, there's this valid criticism of the game that you miss out on a lot of the cool abilities and powers if you play non-lethally. In Infamous, even though there's a difference between the good and evil powers, at base there's still the exact same power, just with different effects and add-ons. But in Dishonored, lethal and non-lethal playstyles require different approaches, meaning if you're trying to complete the game without killing once, you just can't use certain abilities. And this is 100% what the devs were intending, for better or worse. Dishonored, from my interpretation, doesn't have clear defined themes or messages about anti-violence, but there are two messages that are central to the game. Revenge can be justified because essentially all you are doing is making sure your perpetrators face the full consequences of their actions, but in turn, you will have to face the consequences of whatever you did in your pursuit of revenge. And this applies in a literal and thematic way. A major reason why the world around Combo deteriorates on high chaos is because he's leaving bodies around that the rats who are a key player in the downward play can feed and nourish themselves on. The game isn't punishing you for being destructive. It actually gives you all the tools you need for that playstyle, but at the cost that you have to face the outcome of your destructiveness. Because at the end of the day, if you kill innocent people in the name of justice, are you really any better than your perpetrators? When games take this approach to killing, it changes the incentive for playing the game. For non-lethal playstyles, the incentive becomes the satisfaction of going undetected and a more virtuous story. And for lethal playstyles, you get more moment-to-moment enjoyment out of the game and have the freedom to experiment with the combat system. To be honest, I don't see bad endings as inherently punishing. They're more so just bleak conclusions to bleak actions. Our previous discussions about Uncharted, Tomb Raider, and The Last of Us show that the more seriously a game takes itself, the harder it is to get away with any dissonance between the narrative and gameplay. But, massive but, I do still think the non-lethal playstyle could be improved. They sometimes lack the variety needed to find enjoyment in them. Being limited to one playstyle with a lack of variety from start to end can be boring, especially in Dishonored where you can only really use 3 powers if you're doing a pacifist playthrough. With that said, it's sometimes over-exaggerated how killing affects the endings and the chaos system. You can get away with killing around 30% of the guards in a level before you reach high chaos, and killing the main target doesn't change the chaos level at all. So what's the solution? The truth is there isn't one. By examining these games, we can see that the issue about killing is handled is really a part of a broader challenge of integrating gameplay with the story. Whether it's a seamless story that amplifies the emotional weight of every action, like in The Last of Us Part 2, or a dynamic morality system that adapts to players' choices, like Infamous Second Son. Each approach offers something unique that deepens the player engagement, but has its own caveats. The Last of Us Part 2 thrives on nuanced storytelling, where characters' decisions are complex and layered, but it sacrifices player agency to maintain narrative control. On the other hand, Second Son offers players more choices through a karma system. However, the choices often fall into binary categories, either overwhelmingly good or overtly bad, which simplifies the moral dilemmas compared to more complex narratives. Dishonored, on the same hand, uses the chaos system, where the player's actions, whether lethal or non-lethal, affect the world around them. This system allows players to see the consequences of their actions reflected in the game's setting and story, making each decision feel impactful. However, it highlights the challenge of designing a game around multiple playstyles, because non-lethal playstyles can leave some players feeling underwhelmed, or in my case, just whelmed, something that many games struggle when addressing violence and morality. If you made it this far, you'll notice that all the games discussed have flaws in how they handle violence and player morality. This isn't to say that killing in games is inherently flawed, but it's an obstacle developers face in balancing narrative with gameplay. If we judge this implementation, we could put all games on a scale from ludonarrative dissonance to ludonarrative harmony. Ludonarrative dissonance being when the story and gameplay are in conflict, creating a jarring disconnect for the player. Then suspension of disbelief, which is when there is some disconnect between the story and the gameplay, but it's not major, so players are willing to overlook it because the gameplay is enjoyable or the narrative is compelling enough. Then ludonarrative alignment, or just general alignment, which is when there might be some complications between gameplay and story, but you would have to really be looking for them to find it. While the actions the player takes may not fully mirror the character's motivations, the mechanics and the narrative remain reasonably consistent, and the player doesn't feel the need to overlook too much. And then lastly, ludonarrative harmony, which is when the story and gameplay are seemingly intertwined, with each other reinforcing the narrative and character motivations. The player's choices and actions feel perfectly synced with the story being told. As mentioned before, this struggle stems from the fact that games are unique in combining elements from other mediums, cinematography, character development, and world building, while adding the interactive layer of gameplay. It's this interactivity that can either elevate a game to new heights or expose weaknesses in how story and mechanics align. Even if a game excels in storytelling, visuals, and character design, its gameplay systems, especially those tied to morality and player choice, can make or break the overall experience. But all these games contribute to the ongoing evolution of video games as a medium capable of exploring complex themes and engaging players on multiple levels. As the industry grows, I look forward to see how they tackle this issue. To be able to make a video about such a topic and learn about all the different ways games approach the same issue was kind of fun to do. You're probably going to be seeing a lot more of me from now on. I'm not one to overshow on the internet, but it does affect the future of this channel. So I did recently get laid off from my job. Well, the site is called being retrenched. I know, sucks to suck. But I got to sit around and wait to find a new job, so I'll be putting more effort into YouTube for the time being. I don't expect this to become my day job, but it's a productive and enjoyable way to spend this downtime. I already have 3 videos in the pipeline. They just need to be edited. One on how The Last of Us Part 1 doomed the Fireflies, and another one on how games handle sexual assault, which is a very heavy topic that I took a lot of time and care in researching. I don't know which I'm going to work on first, but the scripts are all done. So look forward to that. And remember, like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one.